Hello, I'm Jonh Ingham, and in 1976 I wrote and did the first interview with the Sex Pistols, and throughout that year documented both them, the Clash, the Buzzcocks, the Damned, everybody, and the rise of the punk movement. And very early on in that whole scene I met this man here, Don Letts. Don was working at a place called Acme Attraction, selling clothing that the early punks were well into buying. He went on to become a filmmaker, made the Punk movie, which is the only document of that period, became a member of BAD, Big Audio Dynamite, has made many music videos, several films, TV documentaries, and currently runs a show on BBC Six as a DJ. So we're going to talk today about Don, where he came from and what formed his attitudes and way of living out of that whole period back in 1976. So why don't you grew up in Brixton? Why don't you give us a picture of what Brixton was like in the 60s as a young person?
Well, I'm part of what they call first generation British born black. My parents came over in the mid-50s as part of the Windrush generation to help rebuild the country after the Second World War. And it's interesting because growing up, you know, I call myself black British now, which kind of rolls off the tongue. But back in those days, it was a very confusing concept because we obviously weren't British, we weren't Jamaican, we were of Jamaica, but we weren't Jamaican. So we were this kind of weird lost tribe. And to make that even more difficult, there was a lot of kind of right-wing action in the early days. I mean, the English people in this country were very kind of almost frightened of this influx of black culture. And through the 60s, I'm picking up on kind of pop culture, the whole civil rights things going off in America. And through various cultural and musical journeys, I was able to finally call myself black and British, and that means something. But that took a long time. That wasn't until like probably the middle 80s. Well, I think like all adolescent young people, you're looking for that spirit of rebellion.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because I obviously grew up with reggae all around me. So I took it for granted. You know, it's interesting with Jamaican music. It's not something that just the kids do. Mum and dad's listening to it as well, and so are the grandparents. So it's all inclusive. So you kind of just took it as the norm. So for me to look for that spirit of rebellion, I looked to my white mates. And they're listening to Led Zeppelin and The Who and The Kinks and whatever. And I'm beginning to sort of take messages in from that stuff. And in the same way, they're looking for a spirit of rebellion, and they're looking to my culture. Yeah. So there's this weird cultural exchange going on, but it wasn't formulated. It was done very innocently. It wasn't until the punk rock explosion in the late 70s that I began to see method behind this kind of weird cultural exchange. I began to see how understanding our differences actually brought us closer together, as opposed to us all trying to be the same.
Right. Part of getting out and meeting all those people, you got out into the King's Road in the early 70s, hustling as I would understand it,
yeah,
probably.
No, it's interesting because back in the mid-70s, early 70s, the King's Road was a really hit place. And what was almost just as strange is it might be hard for people to comprehend this now, but back in those days you had these shops, particularly in my shop, Acme Attraction, and Vivian and Malcolm's shop, which was called Sex in those days. And in these shops, sort of like-minded people hung out and gravitated, all the people that were dissatisfied with the mainstream at the time. And out of these shops would emerge this new subculture called punk rock. But I have to say that music and fashion, before the punk rock thing, really was my way into this kind of new way of life. I don't know what you'd call it, a sort of art-driven, music-driven career. I hate to use that word. I remember the very first rock and roll act I ever saw was the Who. Must have been in 1971. And they were doing a full dress rehearsal. I was going to school, the rumour went around school, rock bands playing in the Young Vic. We didn't know who they were. Turns out it was the Who. I go and see them play. Keith Moon's like 5 yards in front of me. And after seeing that performance, my life was completely changed. You know, I was definitely going to be left of centre for the rest of my life.
So that period when the Who were playing was probably their most over the top. very expansive the way they took over the stage, very loud, really in your face. I mean, when that first hit you, those first 5 or 10 minutes, was it instant like, yeah, this
absolutely.
is
I mean, you know, we're not talking, The Who, I don't know if you guys know who The Who are, but you've got to check them out. And they had a heritage of being sort of countercultural anyway, because they started off as a kind of classic mod group. You know, they're doing Substitute, Pictures of Lily, My Generation, all classic songs, as was that period of British music. By the time I saw them, the big rock thing was coming and the pyrotechnics, the smoke and the laser. But I was like 14 then when I saw that. Mm-hmm. So it was mind-blowing.
Ready for
and this was a production rehearsal, you know, where they did everything they would do in a live show, but I was this close to them.
Yeah.
But, you know, soon after that, I had to take exams at school. I don't know, that's like 15, and back in those days, you had to choose what subjects you wanted to pursue. And my parents, I was really good at art and woodwork, and my parents were like, no, black people aren't good at art. You have to pick a career. So they made me take up chemistry and physics and technical drawing. And while I was doing those exams, I had my kind of, I don't know, rock and roll breakdown, because for chemistry, I wrote, a chemist I was not to be, that I clearly state, because I've got a splitting headache and I cannot concentrate, and I handed that in. For technical drawing, I drew a nude woman and I just wrote, curves are better than straight lines, and I handed that in.
Okay.
And promptly, basically, left school and went to the King's Road, Chelsea.
Right.
Which is, you know, a very formative part of my life.
I think in those days too, it's maybe hard to understand now, but it was lots of small boutiques. It was very easy to set yourself up and be in business with your own vision of what fashion should be.
That's right. I mean, and the rents weren't too high that prohibited individuals with really interesting ideas to be able to get those ideas out there, unlike today, you know, where it's only corporations that can afford the rents.
So you had Vivienne Westwood and Malcolm McLaren down there at World's End with Let It Rock at first.
It was Let It Rock.
And then it became Too Fast to Live.
Too Young to Die.
And then it was Sex. And all of these are changes going on. And further up the road, you're about the middle, right? Acme Attraction.
Acme Attraction.
And you're selling 60s American clothing.
We're selling a lot of 50s retro clothing, you know, and jukeboxes and things like that. I think the main difference between our two shops was this, is that Vivienne and Malcolm's shop was a lot more Eurocentric. You know, they're playing rock and roll. The clothes in there, you know, you could buy a pair of trousers in there for like 50 quid. In my shop, trousers were 15 quid, and I'm playing hardcore dub reggae. Yeah. And you've got to understand, you know, there's a lot made out of Don Letts, the punky reggae party, and the Roxy and all that. But before Don Letts and the Roxy, there was a tradition of white working class kids gravitating towards black music for their fix of rebellion. You know, before reggae, it was Tamla Motown. Before Tamla Motown, it's American R&B. And for most white working class British kids, reggae was the soundtrack to their rebellious years. I think the initial attraction was the anti-establishment vibe. Right. You know, Chant Down Babylon. You know, when the Pistols were singing Anarchy in the UK, that was our version of Chant Down Babylon. But, and I know I'm preempting you here, I have to say this, that this cultural exchange was not one-way traffic. The punks are picking up on, you know, the whole reggae culture, but at the same time, I'm getting messages from them as well. And I think the most important message I got from punk was the DIY ethos, the DIY ethic, do it yourself, which is funny because I think it's inherently part of surviving in the developing nations, developing world, Jamaica. What punk taught me was how to use that DIY ethic, not just to survive, but to better your situation and express yourself.
So you're picking up, I think this seemed to be quite common. You'd look around and you'd see, okay, they're the musicians, I can't play, what am I going to do? And I get the feeling you're doing that too. It's not enough just to be...
A fan, good point. Yeah. That's a very good point. That, you know, I think one of the most important things about punk rock is that it broke down that wall that said, you know, we're the band and you're the audience. What punk rock said to me and everyone else was, hey, if you're brave enough and you've got a good idea, you can be part of this thing too. So I'm looking around and all my white mates are picking up guitars. And the energy was such that I wanted to pick up something too. But the stage was full up, man. So I picked up a Super 8 camera. And that was inspired by the fact that I had seen a movie called A Harder They Come back in 1972. Jamaica's most famous reggae movie. And I was really taken by the way that not only did it entertain, but it informed. And I was of an age where I needed to be informed. You know, it's funny because before Harder They Come, I knew what reggae sounded like, but I didn't know what it looked like. The only images I knew about reggae were colonial ones of somebody limbo dancing or somebody playing steel drums.
So for you, it visually had the same effect as for people like, I mean, I'm not even English, so it was like a whole new world opened up. And for you, that's the same thing then? You'd never seen reggae or that experience?
We'd heard it, like I said, we knew what art we were supposed to sound like, but we didn't know what we were supposed to look like until I saw A Harder They Come, followed soon after by the advent of Bob Marley hitting the stage.
Right.
And I thought, you know what, I'd like to express myself visually too. But I couldn't see a way forward. Back in those days, it was very much an old boy network. And then lo and behold, 1977, punk rock explodes with the DIY ethic, do it yourself, and I picked up a Super 8 camera and reinvented myself as Don Letts, the filmmaker. Didn't even read the goddamn instructions.
And just took it down the Roxy one night and started filming.
Exactly right. I took the camera down and I figured, well, if I can capture this energy, I've got to be on the right track. And luckily, I guess the only talent I had back then was my taste, because I seemed to point the camera at the right bands, the bands that turned me on. So I'm filming the Pistols, the Clash, the Slits, the Banshees, the Buzzcocks, Subway Sect. Beyond that, not a lot of others. There were some other humorous things in there, Johnny Moped, Eater. But the point being is that, inspired by punk rock, I reinvented myself as a filmmaker. And I think that that's why punk rock has this lasting legacy, this depth, this gravitas, is that it wasn't just a soundtrack, it wasn't a fucking mohawk. It was about empowerment and freedom. I mean, listen, you've heard that cliche, you know, when the Pistols played and the Clash played, the next day, hundreds of new bands would form. Partially true. But also there was a lot of people that would walk away from those shows inspired by this energy, and it informed whatever they did. So you might have became a journalist, people became photographers, people became fashion designers, graphic artists, filmmakers, and it was very much a complete subculture, and I think that's why we're here talking about it now.
So you described the bands, you chose to shoot some people and not others. At what point did you stop just recording and start thinking, I'm making a film here and I'm making aesthetic decisions about what I'm doing?
You know that I didn't make that decision, somebody made it for me. No, I did. So I'm filming all these bands, no real purpose in mind, just wanted to kind of get to know a camera. And then one day I read in the NME, which was a popular music paper of the time. Not so popular now, it's the internet. And in the paper it said, Don Letts is making a punk rock movie. I thought, oh, that's a good idea. I'll call it a movie. And that's why it's called the punk rock movie. That's what it's in the NME. And basically sort of stuck all this stuff together, literally in my living room with almost sellotape and scissors. And fortunately got to show it at the ICA, which is like an art house in London. And it broke all box office records. And there you are, through punk rock, Don Letts is a filmmaker. Luckily, while this is all going on, I'd obviously become quite close to a lot of the bands back then. And some of them had achieved quite a bit of success, it has to be said. Public Image asked me to do their very first music video. It's called Public Image. And then the Clash asked me to do London Calling. And lucky for me, after that, I went on to do all their music videos. And basically, from that point on, spent a period of time directing a shed load of videos, nearly 400 music videos to date. I don't do them anymore. But and during that period is where I guess I learnt my craft. Before punk rock happened, I bumped into Malcolm McLaren. I walked into a shop, I think it might have been 1974, 75. And it was like walking into this cultural Aladdin's cave. And I owe a lot to Malcolm because he was probably the first person that made me realise that all these kind of countercultural ideas that I felt I was having, you know, they weren't isolated moments. There was a heritage and a lineage to this tradition. And not only was there a lineage and a heritage, but even back in those days, and we're talking about late 60s here, you know, early 70s, so the legacy of, you know, what is it? The Paris riots or Kent State and all that stuff. You know, that was all in my mind. But he made me able to kind of see how it was all interconnected. You know, he helped me join the countercultural dots. And I think it was him that made me realise, hey, since it is a tradition and a heritage, like I say, if you're brave enough and you've got an idea, maybe you can be part of this thing too.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the most fortuitous meetings I've ever had. You know, probably him, Chris Blackwell, Joe Strummer, and John Lydon. You know, the people that really kind of.
Just so we know, Chris Blackwell was the owner of Island Records and the guy that, I guess more than any one person, made reggae into a mainstream music force in pop culture and brought Bob Marley into the mainstream.
And Bob Marley, how can I forget Bob? Who I was lucky enough to strike up a relationship with.
Tell us about that. I mean,
luckily for me, in I can't remember now, it's like 76, 77, he came to stay in London. He'd just been shot in Jamaica. Mm-hmm. And I became friends with him. Look, to be honest, I used to sell him weed. I went to see him play at the Lyceum, a really famous show that was like a religious experience for me. And when the show finished, I got in my car and I followed the band back to the hotel. And when the band were all walking in, I walked in with the rest of them. You know, another Baby Dread, no one took any notice. I went into Bob's room and he sat in the middle of the table and all the kind of Rasta elders were there. And they're smoking weed and reasoning with Bob, and Bob's out smoking and out reasoning all of them. It comes to about 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, he's out reasoned and out smoked everybody. And he needs another spliff, and he looks around the room and he sees Baby Dread sitting in the corner with pathetic bag of weed. That's me. He summoned me to the table and we proceeded to reason and smoke, not for very long because I didn't have much weed, till about, I don't know, till the sun came up. And after that, for the rest of that year, we regularly see each other for aforementioned reasons. I don't do that anymore. I was a young man then. And obviously another great moment in my life to become well acquainted with somebody that did inspire me to, you know, I can't begin to tell you. I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you now if it wasn't for Bob. Although, funny enough, the last time we spoke, we had an argument, and guess what it was about?
Do tell.
Punk rock. I'd gone round there and I was wearing bondage trousers, kind of punk rock style. And I'm in there, I go into Bob's room and he looks at me, he's like, Dunlets, you look like one of them blood clot nasty punk rocker. I'm like, oh, English, that's Dunlets, you look like a nasty punk rocker. And he'd been reading the sort of British tabloid press, which had painted a very negative view of the whole thing. You know, it was gobbing and nihilism and negativity. And as I said before, it wasn't about that. And I had to stand there and sort of defend my white mates. I'm like, Bob, you're wrong. They ain't crazy ballheads. They're my friends and they've got something to say. And basically Bob said, I'll get the fuck out of here. And I did. I walked out in a huff. But I tell you what, I was really proud that I stood my ground. Needless to say, 3 months later, Bob's hanging around with journalists and he becomes somewhat more informed about the movement. Yeah. And he's moved to write the song Punky Reggae Party, in which he's bigging up the Pistols, the Clash, the Slits, Feel Good and the rest of them. I was going to say, you know, as much as these punks were turning me on, and I owe a lot to the whole punk rock movement as it was in the late 70s, I was doing the same and trying to turn them on. So I take people like Ariana from the Slits, R.I.P., Joe Strummer, R.I.P., to various sound system and reggae shows. And they would... I was going to say quite often, always, they would be the only white person in the dance. John Lydon would come to a lot of them as well. And they would literally be and they got a lot of respect for that. Because, you know, back in those days, they were kind of intimidating places. Let's put it that way. I can guarantee that, and I remember taking Joe to the Hammersmith Palais that same night that he was later inspired to write that song about. Yeah. And it was interesting because he'd gone to see this kind of roots, reggae, ghetto kind of thing. And what he saw was something more akin to kind of Las Vegas and dazzling and showman. And I think, you know, it was an awakening for him because I think he had this romanticized idea of what ghetto life was about. You know, he should have realized there's a clue in the word ghetto. Get out. Yeah. It's not something you aspire to. It's something that ideally you want to get out of. Yeah. So what he saw was Just Stitch and Delroy Wilson and all the rest of the people that he names in the songs in their kind of Tamla Motown mode. And hence, you know, in the song White Man in Hammersmith Palais, that line, what is it about? Turning rebellion into money. Yeah. But I think it was more about his confusion about ghetto life.
Did you recognise the evening when you heard the record?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, hey, White Man in Hammersmith Palais. There was only one Hammersmith Palais and he was the only white man and I took him. Yeah.
Do you see that music videos are an interesting way to get other messages through that, and how you approach that?
Undoubtedly, they had that potential. There's no two ways about it. Hey, listen, one of my favourite videos that I ever did was a thing called Pass the Dutchie for musical youth. Very simplistic video, but what I did was, it's 4 or 5 little black kids they were, like British Jackson 5. And I positioned them in front of the Houses of Parliament. Really simple. But for me, that was a very strong statement. You know, it was supposed to be kind of a postcard from London. And for me, that kind of showed a new face of London, because normally in front of Houses of Parliament, you'd have those, what do you call those guys with the big hats? Queen's Guards or something. The guys in the red, yeah. And that was my kind of musical postcard from London. You think you know London? No. This is what London looks like now. There's Houses of Parliament in the background, a red, gold and green speaker in the foreground, and these guys playing a reggae song. And in that thing, there was this whole thing where they're having a run-in with authority, they've skipped school and they end up in a court. Now, very simplistic. I mean, I wasn't sort of standing on a soapbox doing it, but you kind of subliminally tried to put some ideas in there that were bigger than the song. And a lot of that was down to, obviously, whether the band was credible enough for you to hang those images on.
Right.
And whether you, as a filmmaker, you're intelligent enough to do that within the format of what ultimately is an advert for a record, for a goddamn record company.
Right. You've done lots of videos, music videos. You're known as a documentary filmmaker, both feature-length documentaries and television 30, 60 minutes. You've also made feature film, Dancehall Queen. How did that experience come about?
Dancehall Queen. It's interesting because if you remember me telling you about seeing my first Jamaican film in 1972, and me always funny enough, I always thought the first feature film I made would be about the city that I grew up in and that I love, which is London. Ironically, my first feature film was set in Kingston, Jamaica, courtesy of, once again, Chris Blackwell, who wanted to set up a sort of video label in the same way that he'd started a reggae music label a few decades before. And he came to me with this project, Dancehall Queen, and the idea was for it to be a vehicle for a rebirth of Jamaican cinema. And it's my first feature film. It's now the most popular film in Jamaica. If you ask any young person in Jamaica what the big film is, they'll tell you Dancehall Queen. Harder They Come's a better film. There's no two ways about it. In fact, if anything, it's a homage to Harder They Come. But for the people of Jamaica, you know, when it got released, it was at the multiplex, and in one screen there's Men in Black, and in the other one is Dancehall Queen. After 2 days, they had to kick off Men in Black and put Dancehall Queen on both. And I knew the film was a massive success when I saw like 3 people sitting in one seat. You know, a big buzz for me. It has to be said, because I was born in England, you know, but a lot of what's informed who I am today is of Jamaican culture. So it was a big deal for me to have that film be accepted by the Jamaican people.
So let's go back to sort of the end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s there. We're into that whole post-punk period, New Romantics. There's this huge...
I was about to say the post-punk period is the most interesting, and then you said New Romantics.
Well, it was a hanger, let's call it that. But I mean, I agree with you to an extent that I think that period of, say, 1980 onwards up through the middle 80s, the doors were just wide open.
Yeah, because punk had kind of painted itself into a box, I think.
Yeah, very quickly.
Yeah, and I think a good example of what you're talking about is maybe, you know, the difference between the Clash's first album and London Calling, or the Pistols and Public Image.
Absolutely.
You know, and then the emergence of people like the Pop Group, you know, coming through.
You've got New Order and the Smiths coming out of Manchester.
Right.
I mean, people doing different things in completely different ways. The whole American scene, Talking Heads and Bad Brains and all those kind of people. And you end up in Big Audio Dynamite.
Yeah, not being able to play a goddamn thing.
So this is the question. How do you get from being filmmaker or video maker into a musician? And not only that, but in a band that's got quite high profile right from the beginning, with Mick Jones coming into it.
I was going to say, let's address those things. First off, I don't want to offend any musician by calling myself a musician. I couldn't play a goddamn thing. Basically, after Mick got kicked out of the Clash, and he did get kicked out of the Clash, I mean, what's he going to do? He's not going to become a milkman. He forms another band. And the story goes that one night he's at a club with me, a friend of mine, another Rasta guy called Leo Williams, And he's standing between us, and he looks to his left, and there's Leo, and he looks to his right, and he thought, oh, we look like a band. Why don't we start a group? Whereupon I raised my hand and go, Mick, I can't play anything. And he said, well, neither could Paul when he was in the Clash, but we gave him some stickers, and he learned. Mick gave me some stickers, and I put them on the keyboard. I guess the difference between me and Paul was, Paul eventually took the stickers off his bass. I never took the stickers off my goddamn keyboard. I can't play an instrument for my life. What I did do was throw myself into lyric writing, because I found that very akin to doing treatments and synopses for films and documentaries. And ended up co-writing, 50% of the stuff with Mick. The first song I ever wrote, E=MC², was a top 10 hit. So again, it was more going back to what I said about technical ability and ideas. And I think Mick got me in the band because I couldn't play anything. So I had no rules. My ideas would come from anywhere. Why can't I use that bit of dialogue from TV? Why can't I use that bit of the good, the bad, and the ugly? And that was another reason the whole dialogue and sample thing came up, because I had to justify my space. I couldn't just wear dark glasses and look cool. So before I did the lyrics, I did all this sampling thing, basically to, like I say, justify my space in the band. And also Mick had the idea of using elements of the media to give the music a fuller sound, more cinematic sound. But we reformed last couple of years ago, 25 or whatever, I can't remember, 20th or 25th anniversary.
Yeah, 25th.
And I had to drag up my stickers again, and they had to be bigger. My eyesight's not so good. But the stickers are back on the keyboard. And I've got to tell you, sometimes we played in front of like 80,000 people, 100,000 people, albeit supporting you too. But I'd hold up the keyboard and show people the stickers. I mean, I had no shame.
Was there, in the early days when you were putting the band together, was there a lot of theorizing about what it was going to be? You used terms like cinematic and a wider picture and using the samples and so forth.
I think it was just supposed to be a combination of all the things that turned us on. And we all had different interests. So hence, Big Audio Dynamite sound was comprised of Jamaican bass lines, New York hip hop beats, mixed English rock and roll guitar, and me doing the whole sample and dialogue thing. And basically that's what was turning us on back in those days. And Dan Donovan's there doing this kind of techno thing as well with the keyboards. And it's interesting because I think a lot of those elements are still the backbone of what turned me on in music today, especially the emphasis on rhythm.
You a radio DJ now?
Interesting. Yeah, I'm DJing for the BBC, Six Music.
That seems a long way from a punk rebel down there on the King's Road.
You know what's funny is,
BBC.
It's one of the most pleasurable things I've done in my life. You want to know why? Because people have this perception, Don Lett's punk rock man, Don Lett's reggae man. And both of those things, it's partially true. Yes, I was informed by punk rock. Yes, reggae is in my DNA. But, I don't want to be defined by my colour. BBC actually asked me to do a reggae show. And I'm like, look, that's not all I listen to. Who the hell listens to one genre of music except for a 10-year-old? And I said, I will do the show if you let me play whatever I want to play.
Right.
And in 7 years of doing this show, I have never played a tune I don't like. And the tagline is it crosses time, space, and genres. And that's exactly what it does. There's a lot of bass in there, I have to admit. Probably not too much Chinese music because there's not a lot of bass there, but I'm open. But it's one of the most honest things I've ever done in a weird way. I really, really enjoy it. And also it keeps me in touch with contemporary music, because one of the things I do in every show is make sure I find like 8 or 10 new tracks every week. I don't want to rely on tried and tested things, and I don't want to get stuck in my soundtrack, because once you get stuck in your soundtrack, then you are truly old.
And do you, when you're hearing any of that music, do you hear that attitude, that punk attitude in any of them?
That's an interesting question. Music's potential as a tool for social change has been greatly diminished, and it's something that's actively, I think, it's being done by the establishment. I grew up on music that kind of helped you to be all you can be. Now music's like a soundtrack to passive consumerism. It's not about changing your mind, it's about changing your sneakers. And I have a big problem with that, because music did help me to be who I am today. It has that potential. I'm living proof. Luckily, through my work, I get to travel around the world and to see that outside of England, America, the West, it still has that potential. people still believe that it could communicate, express, inform, inspire, all those things, and entertain. Don't get me wrong, I ain't some preacher on a soapbox. Point is that you can't spend your life on a fucking dance floor. Eventually you've got to stop dancing and deal with reality. And music can help you do that too. You know, that punk spirit, it's like the Force in Star Wars, man. You can't stop it. It's out there somewhere. You might have to look in new places and you might have to look really hard, but it's an unstoppable force.